I swear, being any sort of creative person, right? We're all creative, right? So, but being highly creative, driven to create, uh, aside from creating your reality, right? But like create art, music, dance, something, right? If you're like that, then most likely you've been going through a midlife crisis every year or two since like you were born. Now, many people may tie that to astrology and how the moon, if I'm not mistaken, changes signs every 2.5 years, something like that. So it may very well be tied to that, right? Why not? There's an aspect of it. But I'm saying more like, I mean, let me just tell you a bit about me. When I was like, by the time I was like 2 years old, I was already heavily sedated and with very legal drugs, you know, right? I mean, I was on a bunch of sugar. That's like, I don't even need to ask anyone. I'm certain of it, right? But I have asked uh, my caretaker at that time, right? And it's just like, then let's say at 5 years old, you go to kindergarten. I don't know in other countries what age that would be, right? But 5 years old, you go to kindergarten. Okay, that's a shock, because who are all these people? Well, who is this lady or man teaching this? It's usually a lady, right? God bless them, for real. Uh, who is this lady? Like, and why is she teaching me this, right? And where's my mom? Like, where's my family? Where are my people? Because I don't know anybody here, and I'm 5. I'm vulnerable. Like, at least I feel vulnerable emotionally, right? And then you get to like 7, 8, and you start really, you've been feeling yourself as like a person for a while now, but you're still just like, I mean, I was gonna say naive, but to some, they certain things happen and they grow up fast in certain aspects. So for the most part, that's a bit like, it's a bit sad. It's a bit sad, but we go through what we go through for reasons, right? The most obvious statement ever made. We go through what we go through for reasons. uh but then, yeah, you go to 8, and now it's middle school. And wow, if your middle school was anything like mine, we were wilding in middle school, bro. Elementary, like late elementary, was already starting to get crazy with like, um, usually the opposite sex. That's kind of what opens the other world, you know, the other world of who am I in relation to someone on like a relatively deep level, right? 8 years old rolls around. Now you're in middle school. People got, if it also like, I was the kind of kid where I won't show up in, not that I won't, I could not show up in like the freshest shoes and clothes and things like that, because funds weren't like that. So I would wear the same shoes while everyone had the newest Jordans every single month or every single 2 months, right? Um, and like wear the same sweater, like things like that. And I didn't think much of it. I didn't think much of it then. Now I understand that that was sort of like a social hierarchy. It was a tool to rank me in the social hierarchy. Now that's not the only metric, right, for a middle schooler, but a lot of it is like, yo, do you got the flyness on? If you got the flyness on, you're automatically interesting. If you're not, well, then you need to do something else to be interesting. You know what I mean? So there's that, right? 8 years old. And it's like, going back to like how creative by this time I had already been playing guitar for like a few years, right? God bless the man, Mr. Castillo. Yo, like, curly hair Dominican cat, real cool. He was basically my math teacher, my science teacher. At one point, he was the PE teacher, and he would teach me guitar after school, just basic chords. That's how I know, you know, D and A and E and C, right? I think this is D minor. I need to freshen up on this. So G, right? I'm not flipping you off, I promise. G, right? That's the shape of the chord. That's a great shape of a, someone just was just like, let's just do this right here on a guitar and call it a chord. And that's exactly what was done. Yeah. So I say all this to say that every go around, there is a new layer, or I should say, yes, there is a new layer to the interpretation of the revolution that is you, right? You have many mirrors in this house, and each one of them reflects in certain aspects, right? That's the obvious part. What's the not so obvious part by this time, by 8 years old, is how everything is still being projected from an internal place, right? So it's like self-image is there, but I think the fracture with someone like me, and you may relate, is there's already like a social hierarchy, but there's not really a very clear space of where I am in relation to nothing and no one, right? Because at this point, my identity is perhaps almost entirely relational, right? Because, well, for a child, you usually depend on others to a great extent, right? So according to your relations, your survival is determined. Now, how much of that has changed at sitting as a 28-year-old? Not much, but that's a whole other topic. Maybe we'll get to that. Maybe we'll unpack that. But I was really getting at the fact that it's so interesting to me that I can look back at a version of me 2 years ago, and I've done this for more than a decade, at least. The version of me 2 years ago, I'm like, yo, what the fuck was I thinking? What the fuck was I doing? Why the hell did I handle it like that? And that happens every 2 years. That's the recurring cycle throughout this whole lifespan so far. And I don't think that's ever meant to stop. You know, I don't think that's ever meant to stop. With that said, actually, you know, the Toltecs have this thing. It's kind of like a coming of age system throughout the lifespan, right? So the first, actually, they call it deaths. There's 6 deaths. How could I forget, right? There's 6 deaths. The first one is conception, right? That's the first one. You existed here, now you exist in there and are being incubated and flourishing into the human that you will become in there. But you were once here. You were completely over here. Like, you had no semblance of what a there was. That's a death. That's a transition from life force to life carrier, right? Life force to life carrier. I mean, now I may need to rethink those terms, because we're the ones that carry life. I mean, we both carry life. But yeah, it both are necessary. Let's not even get into that debate, because this is not even that type of video. They have this, so, and then the next death would be, if I remember, I don't remember the next death, but one of the deaths is puberty, and goes back to what we were, you know, talking about a bit earlier, which was the interaction with the opposite sex from the first point of it happening in your life. That is the real introduction to what is other, because it's entirely other. It might as well be a different species, you know. So I say all that, really that was a tangent, but I say all that to, circle back or spiral back around, right? Into every, let's say, 2 years, we go through these transformations that leave the past version of us in the dust, like just ashes to ashes and dust to dust, So I'm really interested in studying longer cycles. I think that's where the real step toward power is. The people in power aren't thinking for the next 2 years. I think they're thinking minimum the next 2 generations, right? Iterations of the life force that is your DNA codex. Yeah. So it's so difficult to frame that for me, I'll say, because there are still aspects of survival mode that I'm reprogramming out of, right? And it's a constant and conscious effort to be able to do so. In fact, I was saying, I think just last night, that to waver even for a second, not even a full second, a moment, however long that lasts for you, to waver in your intent toward impeccability for even a moment, that is what really brings you out. But it brings you out so that you can see it and then go back in again, right? I'm like inverting the actual gesture. So go back out and then come back in again, right? These are just reminders. These are droplets of light, right? That hopefully when you hear and you feel what I'm saying, you hear what I'm saying and feel where I'm coming from, excuse me, that it sparks something in you or continues to fan the flame, right? Because there should already be a flame there. If you found me, you have a huge flame. We're not flickering. We're not flickering. We are a blazing fire. There's a furnace here. And if anything, the main issue is not even that there's a lack of fire. It's that there are challenges toward the regulation of that fire, right? We get into the systems of Qigong and how energy or Qi is said to be expressed and circulating in the body. We spoke a bit in another video about the figure 8, right? And how that travels throughout your body, right? So it comes up behind you, then down your front, and then once it gets to your navel or to your hip region, it goes down your leg or down the back of your leg and then up the front of your leg and then right back through your navel and then up your back and all that, right? Some of you may be like, what the hell is this? Why the hell do I need to know this? Because in you not knowing how shape creates affinity towards something, then you wouldn't be able to anticipate to the same extent the fluctuations that is the psychosomatic war, if you make it, war of regulating the human nervous system. Now, I appreciate that. Now, yeah. So we even go back into the shape of a person, right? Shape creates affinity. There's a certain shape that nature has chosen to bring life forth through, right? Bring life forth through. And then there's a certain shape, right? A shape that holds life, cultivates life. I find it so interesting. I read in this book that, I'm not going to tell you the name of this book because it's quite the read, and it's not for everybody. Everything ain't for everybody. But, you know, if you want to drop it in the comments, if you really want to know in the comments, then maybe I'll share it with you. I read in this book that now this is going to get woo-woo. Stick with me for like 15 seconds. In different dimensions of existence, hydrogen is always the thing that is being distilled or expanded upon. Hydrogen, that's the one, right? Yeah, not the two, it's the one. Hydrogen is the one, right? And the way we can even see the world is because, well, it's really because of water and how it interacts with light. Think about it. And shout out to Inky. For those of you who know, you know. Think about it. If we're really this far away from the sun, then why is it that space is said to be dark and not illuminated all the way through? If there's a whole hydrogen gas chamber, right, that is just burning incessantly, and by the way, it's not a small one, it's the biggest thing in the solar system, right? If we want to go with that model of how cosmology is laid out, right? Well then, once it gets to Earth, now that Earth has the water, now that light can be reflected in the visible spectrum, right? The visible spectrum is a teeny tiny a teeny tiny aspect of the the known electromagnetic spectrum, right? So when we talk about I'll see it, I'll believe it when I see it, you already know where I'm going. It's really the other way around. Because by the time you see something, you're seeing the very last portion of what is being manifested. I think it's what, visible light is less than what, 1%? Less than 1% of the electromagnetic spectrum. The rest of it is just vibes, for lack of a better way of putting it. The rest is just vibes. So it's how do I say this? What a world we live in. What a world we live in. Part of me is like, look, what are you talking about, bro? We need to talk about getting some money, right? And I love the aspect of that drive. The thing is this though, what I've noticed in my life is that earning potential is one thing, capacity to stabilize is another thing, and then capacity to grow it is yet another thing, right? And they're not always like very like, if one aspect is here, they're not always like nearby, you know, each other. They could be wildly different, right? Like the human body is so intelligent that it is beyond our momentary awareness. We really would need to be fully embodied, step into the body completely in order to begin to understand the intelligence that runs through this body. The intelligence that, for lack of a better way of putting it, we call life, right? Facilitated by the breath, the prana, right? Or however you want to label it. This video is getting a little long-winded. I think I've crossed that threshold. These are just droplets of light. I'm sharing them with you in hopes that at the bare minimum, you feel less alone. But ideally, you see yourself in a way that you've always known yourself to be. That could be good or bad. But I'm not really thinking in terms of good or bad. I'm thinking useful or useless. Right? Useful or useless. If you got a nugget, if you got a bit of inspiration from this, share it. I'd love to know in the comments. Let's open these discussions. There's so many discussions that we can open in this, 20-minute span that I feel like we will really have a wealth of information in the comment section. That's really where we will shine in this community. So I look forward to sharing something else with you. Hopefully you share something with me. That way the cipher will be complete. Peace.